Okay, let's take a actual real look at what Herodotus actually said in Egypt or on Egypt, and see if we can dispel the Afrocentric lies that they have. They seem to think that Egyptians were black, and so by conception, then the Colchians were black, because Herodotus actually says that he realized that the Egyptians were Colchians. And of course, the Colchians are people from up in Turkey, around the Black Sea, and up into the Caucasus Mountains. And those are the Caucasians. But Colchians, it also says that they were the Medes, and Medes came to them, and that they were called the Aryans from primordial times. They themselves say this. Let's continue on and see what it does say. So they like to think these things, but let's see what Herodotus actually says, because they've misinterpreted the texts, like they like to do. So he tells us, when Sesostris reached the river Phasis, one of the two things happened, but I am not in a position to say for certain which of the two alternatives is correct. Either King Sesostris himself detached a certain portion of his troops and left them there to settle the country, or dun 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 dun, some of his men had enough of this circuitous journey, going around and back and round and back, of his, and stayed behind at the Phasis River. For the fact is, as I first came to realize myself, and then heard from others later, that the Colchians were obviously Egyptian. So he relates the two together, and he says it's obvious to him. The notion occurred to me. I asked both the Colchians and the Egyptians about it, and found that the Colchians had a better recall than the Egyptians did of themselves. The Egyptians said that they thought the Colchians originated with Sesostris' army, but I myself had guessed their Egyptian origin not only because of the Colchians were dark-skinned and curly-haired, which does not count for much by itself, because these features are common to others too in the area, and it's dark-skinned and curly-haired. It's not black and woolly. This is the exact words that are said. And dark-skinned is just people that are tanned quite a bit, and curly-haired is somebody who has some body to their hair rather than straight hair, but there's a lot of straight hairs in there too, and so he wants to mention that. I'll show you that here in a moment. But more importantly, because Colchians, Egyptians, and Ethiopians are the only peoples in the world who practice circumcision. And let me mention one more way in which these Colchians resemble the Egyptians. These two peoples alone work linen, and they do so in the same way. In fact, their lifestyles in general and their languages are similar. This is the account that Herodotus gives. It's on page 322. The only time Herodotus mentions Ethiopians in relation to Egyptians is due to a cultural practice, the circumcision, which is not so much a racial relation as the Egyptians to the Colchians are a racial relation, but just saying that they practice it also by being part of the Egyptian culture, are attached to it, way down on the other end that he never actually visited. He gives strange accounts, though, too. He's not always right. Herodotus states that the Egyptians and Colchians have similar language, similar lifestyle, and they both work linen. He does not say a word about the Ethiopians in this aspect. In fact, Herodotus never racially compares the Egyptians to the Ethiopians or the Colchians to the Egyptians. He states that the Egyptians and Colchians have dark skin and curly hair, not black skin and woolly hair, like I said. Herodotus doesn't utter a peep about the burnt or scorched-faced Ethiopians' racial characteristics. It comes from other historians. So they have the burnt-faced look of Ethiopians. obviously weren't worthy of racial comparison. If Herodotus wanted to designate Colchians or Egyptians as black people or Negroids, he would have applied the term Aethiops. Instead, he makes a distinction by not using such a term. Egyptians were always Egyptios, or Egyptians. Always. In another instance, Herodotus could have compared the Egyptians to the Ethiopians, but he doesn't. Instead, he states that the semen of the Indians, which of course we all know is white, is not white like other men's, but black like their skin, and resembles in this respect that of the Ethiopians. So here's a case where the man really doesn't have a good grasp of things. In fact, truth of the matter, they actually thought that hair had something to do with sexuality back then, and that hair was like a straw, and it would actually pull and suck up stuff. And so genital hair allowed you to get pregnant a whole lot easier, and growing out your hair. And it's why the edicts ended up being in the church where women had to cover their hair during a time that they were fertile, and whenever they get older and lose that, they cut their hair off. And you notice that women practice that today. They keep long hair through their sexual active life, and then they usually go to an easier, more manageable, very short hair afterwards. This practice is all the way back to Debunking, where women would cut their hair off every year if they were past the mourning ladies, whenever they were past the point of childbearing, or if they were barren. And so, let's go on and look at some other examples here, though. But it's clear that they're different, and Herodotus clearly refuses to lump Ethiopians and Egyptians together as one race, yet Afrocentrics seem to think that he does. He does not. In fact, he separates them, and he says that it's Colchians. Another example of distinction by Herodotus: after this man, the priest enumerated to me from a papyrus the names of other kings, 330 in number. These are Egyptian kings that he's referring to. When he does, out of 330, he calls out, and in all these generations of men, 18 were Ethiopians, 1 was a woman, and the rest were men and of Egyptian race. Of course, the 18 that are Ethiopian could have mixes, and whenever it's in the 24th dynasty, somewhere around in that range. And just being an Ethiopian doesn't mean that you have to be Negroid at all. They seem to be quite a mix, and what we're looking at today is probably not the mix that was going on before. It may have become quite more mixed and quite more darkened over time from what they are. It's not the same as it used to be. It was obvious to Herodotus that the Ethiopians were blacks, and the Egyptians, though, were dark-skinned Mediterranean Caucasian people that were just a little bit lighter as the Colchians, or the Aryans. The Colchians were a mere extension of the Egyptians. This is what he's referring to. Background research into the Colchians reveals them to be a Caucasian people living in the heart of Europe. In other words, Herodotus was comparing Caucasians to Caucasians. More tanned versions versus less tanned versions. People that are down south as rednecks versus up north people that don't get as much sunlight and consider themselves to be more fair-skinned and don't get into the sun as much, and therefore keep their skin a little bit lighter. And so dark is just tanned compared to a person that's very pale. And this is the area that we're looking at here. They would all live in too. But something that you notice is Iberia has an area name on it, and Albania is area. And if you look, this whole white area is area, right? And then the Medians here, Colchis goes all the way through here. And at one time, and here's your Uh-huh. And we're all the way up in here into the Anatolia and Levant and things like this. This area down here is from Empire of Alexandria. But this name here, Sarmathia, it's kind of gone now. But Sumeria, the Good Samaritans, somewhere in there. It also contains the word math. Math. Let's continue though. Ancient coins of Colchians are depicted with typical Caucasian features and mainly straight hair and some curly. Let's take a look at this. I know it's a little smudged out. Hopefully it shows well in there. It looks like it's showing okay. I mean, it's high def, but this was struck during the time of Herodotus, and you can see they have this crest or band over here, but look at that mullet. Look at that old country boy mullet, right? Straight back, that's mullet. Short in the front, party in the back. There's your mullet. Sometimes they have curly hair up here and a little bit of curly hair in the back, but that's basically a mullet. A little sharp nose, not so Romanesque or bent over. Full on mullet, straight up. There's no Negroid admixture in current Colchians. Genetic distances allowance allow the Georgians can be placed between the populations from the northern Caucasian, west and central areas, and the Transcaucasian ethnic groups. Some barrier in between there that runs all the way up into ancient Russians, who aren't exactly who they used to be anymore either, after a lot of things happened to them with like Bolsheviks and so on. An examination of the genetic relationship between Georgians and with European and West Asian populations show that the Georgians are approximately equidistant from the groups compared. And so in other words, there's slight variations on a theme. Really not much difference, slight variations on a theme. A little mix here, a little mix here, a little mix here from each other. Referring back though, if you'll remember, Herodotus states the dark-skinned and curly-haired does not count for much by itself because these features are common to others too. Yeah, like the Minoans and all the other guys that are around in that area that are a well-tanned people living year-round in the Mediterranean area, constantly out, wearing nothing but shorts pretty much, and getting damn good tans. That's all it really ever was. Other nations exhibiting such characteristics, though. Assyrians have this longer hair that, if you look, they braid it. It's somewhat curly looking on the ends of it, and there's curly hair with the Greeks. But they don't keep it long. If they kept it long, would they begin braiding it? If you braided straight hair, does it make it curly? Doesn't it crimp it somewhat? So you look at Greeks and Romans, Parthians, all of these Caucasoid people from this area, and they all have these same traits too. As far as the dark skin as opposed to burnt, scorched, Ethiop black, well, white people get good tans too. All you have to do is get out in the sun. You get these professional bodybuilders and they just go out and suntan. And when they suntan, bam, look how dark that is. It's got to be a little darker than the Egyptian statues. And he just goes out and professionally tans. And you know, they spray tan a lot of these guys, but whenever they do, their face is white, and then their body's all dark and everything. This guy tans, straight up. Sure, he's got some oil on him, but these are tans. So, and Afrocentrics always insist on Herodotus meant woolly. But he doesn't mean woolly. He didn't mean woolly. However, none of the royal mummies exhibit woolly hair. Their hair ranges from straight to wavy to curly. A lot of them are blonde, red-haired, auburn, but not woolly. So now we get hypocritical. Afrocentrics adamantly argue then back a different point in favor of woolly hair. And when confronted with the mummies, they mysteriously resort to claiming something else. They're saying, oh, look, he said woolly, so it's black. And then all of a sudden he goes, hair is not an indicator of race. Well, you just tried to use it as an indicator of race. In fact, you actually just misconstrued everything to try to make that point, didn't you? Just really doesn't seem fair, does it? Hippocrates lived during the time of Herodotus. He said the Colchians and Phasis are large and corpulent in body, neither joint or vein is evident. They have a yellowish flesh, as if victims of jaundice. And he was comparing them to themselves. And I believe this was definitely because of their diet during the time. Lacking vitamin C and a lot of things. Maybe fruit trees would help him out and a few other things. So yeah, Herodotus. What do people say during that time? And he mentions Ethiopians, not Egyptians, as having the woolliest hair of all men. He does not mention Egyptians of having woolly hair. He distincts that to them as they've got that woolliest hair of men. And if you look at them, they've got quite the more straightened out hair. It looks like there's almost been products put onto it when there hasn't, compared to regular Negroid hair that is tight napped to the head, and you have to do a lot to it to get it to straighten out. Anyhow, like and subscribe. Share if you will. Can't wait, but I've got some interesting videos coming up on other cultures too. It's just I keep getting hounded with these guys telling me to prove it, and they try to tell me what Herodotus said. So here's one to answer him on what he really said. Appreciate y'all. Peace.